My name is Josh Houry, and I am the Community Relations Coordinator here at the Saskatchewan SPCA. Thank you for joining us for our latest webinar series, Safe Places for People and Their Pets. I would like to start off by recognizing the land on which I live and work, and where I am today is Treaty 4 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Assiniboine, and Saulteaux peoples, and homeland of the Métis. I would also like to acknowledge and pay my respect to the ancestors of this land. As I had mentioned, if you are just joining us, please feel free to take some time to introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're joining us from today. As you may know, the victims of intimate partner violence often stay in a violent situation rather than leave without their pets. There are limited options for animal owners who want to leave an abusive relationship, and currently most domestic violence shelters in Saskatchewan do not allow pets. This webinar series will explore domestic violence and how it affects both people and their pets. And during today's presentation, we'll hear from Crystal Giesbrecht from the Provincial Association of Transition Houses and Services of Saskatchewan and Laura Mudd with the Saskatchewan SPCA. And we'll get some guidance for domestic violence shelters on becoming pet friendly. We invite you to share your questions with us using the Q&A feature. Again, if you hover your mouse around the bottom of your screen, you will see the Q&A box. Please feel free to put your questions or submit your questions as they come to you. And at the end of the presentation, we will take some time for questions with Laura and Crystal, and we will also have Ali Phillips joining us as well. I would now like to introduce our speakers. As I had mentioned, Crystal Giesbrecht is joining us, and Crystal is the Director of Research and Communications at the Provincial Association of Transition Houses and Services of Saskatchewan, also known as PATHS, the member association for domestic violence shelters and counseling centers. Crystal is a PhD student in the Department of Justice Studies at the University of Regina and a member of the Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability's Expert Advisory Panel. Crystal's work at PATHS includes educating professionals and the public on best practices for supporting survivors of intimate partner violence and conducting research relating to intimate partner violence. She has conducted research in Saskatchewan on the connection between intimate partner violence, animal maltreatment, and the need for animal safekeeping. Joining Crystal is Laura Mudd, the Family Ties Coordinator at the SaskSPCA. With her volunteer and work experience helping both people and animals, Laura recently joined the SaskSPCA in the newly created position of Family Ties Coordinator. After completing her Bachelor of Social Work degree, she served as the First to Jordan's Principal Service Coordinator at the Saulteaux First Nation Health Center. She continues to work on a casual basis as a medical social worker at Royal University Hospital and as a veterinary assistant at the WCVM Veterinary Medical Center. And with that, I will turn it over to Crystal and Laura.
Thank you so much, Josh, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. I will just share my slides. So my name is Crystal, and I will pass it over first to Laura to get us started.
Perfect. Thanks, Crystal. So Josh, I know had already spoken on this, but Crystal and I also wanted to just acknowledge the land that we are presenting on, which is Treaty 6 territory and Treaty 4 territory. These lands that we live and work on today are the ancestral and existing lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Dene, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis, as well as many other nations that use this land as traveling routes, hunting grounds, and gathering spaces. We would like to use this moment to reflect on what truth and reconciliation really means to us.
PATHS, the organization where I work, is the member association for domestic violence shelters and counseling centers in the province of Saskatchewan. We support our members and the public by conducting research, delivering training and education, offering opportunities for peer support for members, and advocacy and collaborating with government and other partners to work toward ending intimate partner violence in Saskatchewan. And a partner organization of PATHS and the Saskatchewan SPCA is Stops to Violence. They are a provincial network that connects individuals and organizations who have the shared goal of working to end interpersonal violence in Saskatchewan and creating safer communities.
And the Saskatchewan SPCA is an animal welfare organization working to ensure the sustained humane treatment of animals. And we recognize that in order to help animals, we must help their humans as well. And so our three organizations, PATHS, STOPS, and the SaskSPCA, have been working together in partnership for over a decade to help build safer, healthier communities.
So some of the ways that we have worked together include developing resources for survivors of intimate partner violence and also service providers. The Getting Out Guide is a comprehensive guide for survivors and includes information regarding planning for safety with pets. Saskatchewan SPCA now hosts violencelink.ca, which is a comprehensive website dedicated to sharing resources relating to the link. And we've also conducted research on this topic in Saskatchewan, which I'll tell you a little bit about that shortly. And other things that we have worked on include raising awareness of the link. So we talk about the link when we do training and education, and we also speak to the media about this topic. And our organizations continue to work together to develop resources and work toward practical solutions in the province of Saskatchewan, one of them being the topic of pet-friendly shelters and the topic of today's webinar.
So the human-animal bond. So in Canada, over half of households have pets, and 74% of those people find their pets to be an important part for their mental health and their family. I think the statistic that 95% could not imagine giving up their pet for any reason speaks to why we're here, to ensure the human-animal bond isn't broken and to celebrate the positive things that the bond can provide when a victim is going through a difficult time. And just to give a bit of a snapshot on intimate partner violence in Saskatchewan currently, so perhaps for many of you, the numbers on this slide won't be shocking or new, however, they're not good. So our provincial rate of intimate partner violence is double that of the national rate. And we know rates of actual abuse are much higher than what is actually reported. So if we can eliminate one barrier for these victims, which is to include their animals in sheltering, it is a step in a positive direction to support victims. So what is the link? The link is what references to when an act of violence occurs in one of these areas: child abuse, animal abuse, elder abuse, or domestic abuse. And it is not usually an isolated incident, and there is likely another form of abuse co-occurring or that has occurred already. So they are linked together.
So as I said before, one of the first pieces of work that our organizations did jointly included a research study that started in 2016 that included animal welfare and domestic violence professionals. The results of that study demonstrated the need for continued education and awareness, as well as options for adult, child, and pet survivors, including pet-friendly domestic violence shelters. And then I had the opportunity to conduct another study on this topic beginning in 2020. And this study also included surveys for the professionals as well as the public and survivors who owned animals and interviews with survivors. And I was able to share the findings of that in a previous webinar with the Saskatchewan SPCA. So the recording is available, and also we'll give you the links to read that research as well if it is of interest. But just some brief quotes from that research relating to the human-animal bond. Here we see people talking about how important that is and how animals impact their decision-making. Survivors said, "I loved her so much. She was my best friend." Another survivor said, "It took me longer to get out because I had to find a place where I could bring her with me. And my dog helped me to get through the situation and come to the conclusion that I needed to leave in order for both of us to be safe." In the research, we found support across the board for pet-friendly domestic violence shelters. Animal welfare professionals stated that they hoped domestic violence shelters would be able to welcome animals. And you can see here that an animal welfare professional notes the benefits of having your animal with you during a time of crisis. And another survivor wishing that shelters would be able to include pets along with their families. And the results of the public survey were really encouraging. Many members of the public are already aware of the link, and they understand the importance of shelters for the safety of humans and animals. The respondents to the public survey expressed support for shelters to be able to welcome companion animals, and I think this really demonstrated a lot of community support for pet-friendly programs.
So just in a little bit of conclusion to that research, there were a few key findings from both survivors and support workers. So 80% of survivors reported that their partner had abused or maltreated their animal, and over half said that they didn't want to be separated from their animal. 96%, a huge percentage of service workers, stated that the care and safekeeping of the survivor's animal can impact victims leaving abusive situations. And 78% of workers knew of someone who did not leave an abusive relationship due to care and safekeeping of their animals. So we have these significant statistics to consider, but now what? Well, there was a number of recommendations that came out of this research, two of which are that there should be accessible education and training available regarding the link and concern for safekeeping of animals, as well as partnerships between animal and human sectors to provide all-encompassing services. So based on these recommendations, this is how we ended up here presenting the webinar series, and the recommendations in the research is guiding our partnership of paths, stops, and the SaskSPCA's next steps together.
So as Laura said, our organizations have agreed that there's an urgent need to do this work, and we decided that the first or the next step that we needed to take was working to support the development of pet-friendly domestic violence shelters in Saskatchewan. So we would like to thank the Community Grant Program through the Saskatchewan Community Initiatives Fund for funding this project. We engaged Praxis Consulting to prepare a viability report. And with this report, we set out to put together practical guidance, including around budgeting for shelters that wish to welcome pets along with their humans. The research that went into the viability report included reviewing the literature and documents from existing programs, including the work of Ali Phillips and the Safety Program. Praxis also conducted interviews with pet-friendly shelters elsewhere in Canada. And those shelters had different types of setups, and they kindly shared with us what their experiences were and also shared some of their policies. And then the final step was a focus group with intimate partner violence shelters and animal welfare organizations in urban, rural, and northern Saskatchewan to get some thoughts on the professionals here of what barriers or challenges they might see and how this could realistically come together. So the viability report is now available, and on the screen you see the various areas that are outlined in the report. There's guidance regarding potential funding sources, putting up the physical infrastructure, and publicizing pet-friendly programs once they're up and running. So now Laura and I are going to share some of that content and offer some recommendations.
So allowing women who are fleeing intimate partner violence to bring their pets with them to shelter is helpful for many reasons. Pets are a source of comfort to survivors and their children, and avoiding separating the pets from their humans is preferable. Co-sheltering also reduces barriers as it does not cost the survivor any money, and it eliminates the need to make other arrangements for animal safekeeping that coincide exactly with the length of stay in shelter. The report provides details of 3 types of pet-friendly domestic violence shelters and discusses advantages and disadvantages of each. We'll go into a bit more detail of each kind so you can start to see what type may work best for your space or what's the most achievable and realistic. So the first option is where animals are in the same location as the shelter, but the building is completely separate from the main building where residents stay. This could be an existing detached garage or a new building. This option reduces risk of interaction with other residents or staff, given that all animals will be staying in close proximity, and depending on how the building is set up, some animals may experience stress being around the other animals or from being apart from their human, understandably. It can be assumed that these animals also experienced some level of violence and are now in an unfamiliar place, so for them to be stressed out is understandable. This option requires the most significant investment because it usually will require the construction of a new building on the property. The building will also require heating, cooling, and air circulation systems. There needs to be dividers between pet cages to prevent diseases and distress that may occur when animals are in close proximity. There should also be consideration for staff time, staff to open and close secured doors between the building and animal building and cleaning the additional space. So the second option outlined is to have a room or space for animals separate from the resident living area. This could be a basement, a storage area, an attached garage, or a different wing of the building, but it's in the same building as the residence. This is a lower cost and easier than constructing a new building, but some of the same infrastructure needs still apply. Again, some animals may experience stress being in this type of space and apart from their humans. The cost is more minimal and setup time may be less than the first option. And so the third option is to be in the room and allowing pets to stay in rooms with their shelter residents. And it is the preferred option for a number of reasons. Housing pets in room provides the survivor with access to their pets at all hours of the day and avoids some of the challenges with noise and stress that might come from kenneling animals alone or together with other pets in a separate space. This option also requires little to no renovating or additional setup. In Saskatchewan, shelters are single-staffed for a significant portion of the time, especially overnight and during the evenings. During the weekdays, directors and multiple staff members might be in the building, but there are portions of every day where one staff member is responsible for doing everything, answering the phones, being available for clients. Allowing women to keep their pets in their rooms with them is the most efficient, as it leaves the responsibility for the pet with the survivor and eliminates a separate space that staff need to go out and clean and monitor on top of their other duties.
So in the key informant interviews with pet-friendly shelters, Praxis found that all of the agencies had been successful in forming community partnerships and receiving donations toward sheltering pets. Some agencies shared that they did not actively fundraise for the program and they were able to cover the costs of doing this out of their regular operating budget. Of course, the model of pet-friendly sheltering has a significant impact on the cost of the program. So the viability report includes anticipated costs with each type of program's startup and maintenance and offers suggestions for revenue generation, such as leveraging partnerships for fundraising and supplies. Potential costs for shelters to be prepared for include one-time costs, such as renovations to rooms, if going that way. And items that are purchased, such as crates, can be cleaned and reused by the next family, or the shelter might choose to give those to the clients and they can take them with them when they move out. Ongoing costs include veterinary care, pet food, and other supplies such as cat litter. Therefore, the cost associated depends on the number of animals that come through the shelter. The financial analysis of the in-suite pet-friendly model shows that costs could reasonably be estimated at about $360 per pet, plus any veterinary costs. There is a list in the report of supplies, and it includes everything. So food, treats, leashes, grooming, toys, litter, etc. And then there's also veterinary costs, which are highly variable because it depends on what access survivors had to pet care before coming, if animals had been injured, and also the age of the animals. This estimate is a maximum as well, assuming that the shelter incurs all of the costs and that no supplies are donated. Local businesses and community members are often willing to lend support to pet-friendly programs. And during Ali's webinar last week, she talked about some of the opportunities for fundraising and the community support that does exist for sheltering pets and families together. And economic abuse is common. So some survivors who access shelter will be coming with very little for themselves and their animals. Other people might come for safety, but they bring with them what they need for their pet. In the research that I had the opportunity to conduct, there were examples of survivors who fled violence with their pets. One of these examples was a woman who left a violent partner when she was quite young, and she took her cat and she managed to pack her cat's toys and things for her cat she prioritized that over packing other things because the cat meant so much to her. So depending on the time someone has to plan and what they have available, they may be bringing some of that with them as well. Regarding responsibilities for shelter clients, we see pet owners as being responsible for taking care of their own pets, and this is easier with the in-suite option. Staff can go through policies and guidelines with clients when they arrive, so everyone has an understanding of appropriate care for animals while they're in the shelter. Survivors will feed their own animals, they'll walk their dogs, they'll clean up after their pets. And if there are pieces of that clients or their children can't do because there's safety concerns with them going outside or because of injury or disability, then shelter staff can work with them to figure out a solution. But while we have stated the obvious benefits of allowing survivors to bring their pets with them to the shelter, specifically to house them in their owners' rooms with them, this isn't going to be the best fit for all animals. It depends on the number of pets and also the temperament. Sometimes animal safekeeping at an animal shelter or with a foster family is going to work best. So it's important to work towards having more of those options available as well, so survivors can choose what will work best for them and their pets. And so while the expectation would be that shelter clients are responsible for their pet owners, welcoming pets will add some additional responsibilities for shelter staff. This includes checking to ensure guidelines are followed and pets are cared for, checking in on pets periodically if the resident has to go out and the pet is in their room, cleaning rooms and crates in between use, record keeping, managing supplies and inventory, and forming partnerships with the veterinary professionals and animal welfare organizations to ensure that animals can receive care as needed. And shelters should let potential clients know before they come to the shelter that it's pet friendly. This is incredibly important so that people can plan to leave with their animals. And survivors who don't own animals will want to know that the shelter is pet friendly as well. This might be a consideration for some people who have allergies, for example. However, our recommendation is that animals are staying in the resident's room. They're not roaming freely around the building. So that's going to limit challenges experienced by other shelter clients, and it shouldn't be a problem with allergies, and should keep that to a minimum. When welcoming animals as well, workplaces want to ensure that staff are comfortable and accommodations are in place. So staff members should not have to provide any care or be working directly with animals if they're uncomfortable doing so. And of course, when becoming pet friendly, shelters will want to provide training for staff on animal care, animal welfare laws, and the link. The report lists potential challenges and also gives us solutions to those potential challenges. Having policies in place and informing all clients of rules, responsibilities, and what to expect will go a long way to mitigate any of those challenges that could arise, especially regarding ownership of animals and liability for shelters. Cleaning routines will be extra important to reduce allergens and ensure cleanliness. So we know that's a big part of communal living situations anyway, and shelters have their cleaning routines, and residents are well aware of their own responsibilities there. So this is a bit of an extra piece, but it's not a large piece. Owners will be with their pets in their own rooms, and when they go in and out of the rooms, you'd be taking the dog on the leash or carrying a cat in a crate, so animals won't be roaming around and interacting with other families. These are just some of the areas that a shelter may want to develop policy around before becoming pet friendly. When a client first contacts the shelter, they should be encouraged to bring as much proof of ownership of their pet with them as they can. Shelters will also need to verify that pets are up to date on vaccinations and other necessary treatments. Shelter staff may need to work with clients to help them obtain records and access veterinary care. And in some cases, this might be urgent, depending on if pets are injured or if they're behind on their vaccination schedules when they're coming into shelter. And shelter staff and management will also want to equate themselves with the Animal Protection Act. There may be situations where staff will want to support clients to report a case of animal abuse or animal maltreatment, especially if animals have been left behind with the abusive partner and they continue to be at risk. So these are some of the critical success factors for pet-friendly domestic violence shelters. Networking, including animal welfare organizations, veterinary services, and local businesses and organizations for fundraising and supplies. Cross-sectoral training will be important for ensuring animals are cared for in the best way and that the link is recognized and responded to. Also, increasing collaboration between the animal welfare and the domestic violence sectors will increase innovation and new ideas for good ways to house families together. And it's important to continue doing public education and awareness. Of course, brings in public support and helps with donations, but it also allows members of the community to know that a shelter is pet friendly. Survivors need to know what options they have before they think about making a plan to leave a relationship. And findings from the research with both survivors and the public show that people often go to friends and family first for emotional support and for support and care for their animals. So if community members know, then they can be sure to pass that along and make sure that survivors are aware that they do have options to leave with their pets. So building a strong network through strategic partnerships is critical to the success of pet-friendly sheltering programs. And networks are part of everything from sourcing supplies to the training and education that we talked about, local law enforcement, animal protection, and other animal welfare organizations. Knowing about the shelter can help to recommend it to their clients and the people that they're encountering. And they also may be able to help by offering transportation and helping people and animals get to the shelter. Pet-friendly emergency shelters are necessary for the safety of adult and child and pet survivors. But there's a number of other things to do that are part of the process of escaping violence. And related to that, it's very important that we continue to advocate for pet-friendly rental housing, including low-income social housing. We are pleased that there is one pet-friendly second stage shelter in Saskatchewan, that's Sophia House in Regina, and we'd like to see more second stage shelters generally, but that they be pet-friendly. And Canadian research has demonstrated the need for pet-friendly domestic violence shelters, and so I think an important next step is evaluation. Once we have pet-friendly shelters up and running in our province, it'll be really important to evaluate them to demonstrate the impact, figure out what's working and what could be improved, and also to make the case for funding. So the report offers a roadmap, and I'm not going to go through this in detail, but just to show you what's there. This provides steps that a shelter would want to go through as they're preparing to become pet-friendly. One of the first things is assembling a committee of relevant professions, and the committee can help to create policy and bring in their own areas of expertise to inform procedures for the shelter. And then preparing for launch, the shelter will want to work through staff responsibilities and name a staff member to be responsible for the pet-friendly program. When Laura was speaking before, she was talking about how often shelters are single staffed, and it is the responsibility of whoever's working on that shift to provide what people and animals need and care for all the clients in the building. But when there's one staff member who's designated to order supplies and follow up on those partnerships and oversee the startup of the pet-friendly program that will make things run smoothly. There's also policy development, budgeting, fundraising, and then figuring out the shopping list or everything that needs to be done in terms of the physical space and the necessary supplies. The report includes several recommendations. These are just a few of them. So of course, the first recommendation is for shelters to welcome survivors with pets. We've already stated the reasons why we recommend the in-room option, because it leaves the responsibility for animal care with survivors and gives them access to their companion animal at all times, and because it's the lowest cost model for shelters as well. Ultimately, though, we just want to see shelters be able to welcome pets and keep families safe. So if you have an existing space in a different part of the building or another building that will work well, that is great. The most important thing is to eliminate barriers to safety for people with pets. And allowing survivors to bring their pets also streamlines services and eliminates the need to coordinate other animal safekeeping and match those timelines up. That said, not all pets are going to be a fit in a communal living situation, and sometimes animal safekeeping off-site is going to be a better fit. So again, necessary to maintain those partnerships and to work together with animal welfare organizations to raise funds or do other things to make it easier for animal welfare organizations who are also extremely busy and operating on tight budgets to help out in situations of intimate partner violence. Overall, the availability of more programs for shelter and safekeeping will give survivors choices and reduce barriers to leaving and prevent future harm to people and pets. So we will be continuing to work together with our member agencies and our partners in other sectors to raise awareness of the link and support for pets in domestic violence shelters. And as shelters here in Saskatchewan are becoming pet friendly, we will be working to promote that and including that in our public education and awareness so that survivors know that they have the option to leave with their animals.
So as Crystal said, our three organizations will continue to work together on various projects. The need for solutions for care and safekeeping of livestock and large animals is clear from the research that Crystal conducted. For the present viability study, we focused on pets and domestic violence shelters, but we will work in partnership on the larger animals and those issues. We will continue carrying on with providing education, awareness, and with all that, we'll be fundraising as well. So there was a lot of information in this presentation that we just threw at you. But if you are a shelter that is looking and thinking if you want to become pet friendly and set that up, please contact us and we can assist you in that process and support you through it as best we can. We also have a number of startup kits for both cats and dogs that include the basics, kennels, some food, dishes, toys, that sort of thing. And we can provide those to shelters to help make the process one step easier for you. And again, you can contact us to inquire about those kits. We are going to start a community of practice, which I'm really excited about, which will be facilitated by Crystal and I, and it will be a roundtable meeting for shelters that are pet friendly, as well as shelters that are working towards becoming pet friendly, so that we can discuss questions, problems, successes, and topics like forms, policies, or animal behavior. What we discuss at these meetings will basically be determined by what the group wants and finds useful at that time. It will be roundtable style so that we will create a support network of sorts. So the first meeting is on February 15th in a few weeks here at 1 p.m. It'll just be an hour to start with, and you can email me to sign up and join us on that first meeting. And we're initially planning on having meetings once every 2 months, but since this is just starting, we'll kind of see where it goes. And lastly, please reach out to myself or Crystal if you have any questions or would like to talk about anything. We, of course, believe it is important that there are pet-friendly shelters in Saskatchewan, and we want to support and assist you as best we can to achieve that. And lastly, if you want to find and read the full report that we've been discussing, you can go to our website Violence link, and there are more resources there, including the report.
And we'd like to thank, of course, the Community Initiatives Fund, Praxis Consulting, as well as the shelters from across Canada who provided us with their experiences and their feedback, and professionals here in Saskatchewan who were part of this work as well. There is our contact information, and we'll just move on. We just want to tell you these references are here. We're not going to spend time on this, but our PowerPoint will be shared with everyone who's in attendance today. So you will have my contact information and Laura's contact information as well as those references. And now we're just going to have some time for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Crystal. That was some great information. We do have a question that has come in, and I will encourage everybody that is still with us to submit any questions that you may have using the Q&A feature, or even just pop it into the chat if you're comfortable with that as well. I am going to invite Ali Phillips to join us from the safety program as well. So we will try and make that happen. There we go. Ali is joining us now. And we'll just make sure. Hi, Ali. How are you today?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you.
Good. Thank you for joining us. So the question that has come in so far asks, in your research, have you heard of any laws or policies that would grant custody of an animal to the survivor without having to go to domestic violence court? Similar to having children, I have experienced survivors not wanting to leave, not necessarily because they are afraid of violence against their pets, but because they are threatened that if they leave, the abuser will keep the pet or kidnap the pet and maintain custody so that they will never see them again. Crystal, can we start with you?
Yes, sure. I have a couple thoughts on this, and then maybe Ali can tell us of maybe things that are innovative in other jurisdictions that we might look to. One thing that I think is helpful, and this is a temporary solution, but in Saskatchewan, our Victims of Interpersonal Violence Act includes a provision for emergency intervention orders. That is a temporary order that can grant someone who's experiencing violence temporary custody ownership of the home, children, property, etc. Now, that all gets sorted out later, but I think for many people, this is a really helpful solution, because rather than having to try to pack up and leave in the middle of the night, taking children, taking animals, taking all your stuff you need for work and figuring out where you're going to go, removing the person who is choosing to use violence from the home makes sense and is a sensible solution. That's not going to be safe, or it's not going to be what all survivors will want to do, but for some people that works. So temporarily that can help to keep someone in their home with the pets. Regarding more permanent sort of solutions around ownership with pets, this is not my area. I'm not a legal scholar, but what I had been hearing previously was that courts sort of weren't dealing with it. Animals were considered personal property, but when it came to family court, judges weren't making decisions regarding the animals, where the animals would live. But there have been some decisions, and I can't cite these exactly. Maybe someone else can, or I could follow up with the person who asked the question later. But I know I've read of a couple recent Canadian decisions where a decision was made around the care for animals. So that might be somewhere where we're seeing some positive forward movement as well. I think as we continue to do more education regarding the link and how important it is and the risk to animals in the context of intimate partner violence, we can get there and help that to be recognized by the family court system as well, would be my hope.
Great, thanks, Crystal. Ali, do you have any information that might be useful and even examples of what is happening in other jurisdictions?
Yeah, unfortunately, animals are still considered property under the law. And, so I always ask people, as hard as this may be to hear, think of an animal like a vehicle, like a car, like a refrigerator. Think of them like property, and what would you have to show that the car, the house, the refrigerator is yours? So having adoption paperwork, or if the cat or dog came from a breeder, you're going to have the bill of sale. Any veterinary work that has the name of the survivor as paying for the veterinary care. All of those things are important. Now, yes, it's one more thing that they have to collect, as part of pet safety planning, and that's what I recommend as part of the pet safety planning is get those documents around, or at least be able, to be able to talk to the shelter that I use this veterinarian, and they're going to have paperwork that I was bringing this dog in. I was the primary caretaker. So, it is an issue, especially, here in the States, it is an issue, but more judges are leaning toward, the non-offending caregiver, and realizing that the care that is given, who's taking the dog out for a walk every day, who's cleaning the litter box, who's, buying the pet food and running the pet to the visit, they're taking all of that into account. So, those are just some things to think of.
Great, thank you. Laura, I just wanted to check, do you have anything that you would like to add as well, or?
I think Crystal and Ali hit everything.
Great, thanks. We do have another question, and maybe Ali, we can start with you here. In your experience, how do domestic violence shelter staff feel about becoming pet friendly? Are they supportive of the change?
It depends on who you're talking to. I find that the pet people, the people who, we've got four-legged and feathered, family members at home, they're the ones that are really driving this. And there are shelters that are concerned about, oh, there's Rudy. There's shelters. It was a matter of time before he joined. There are shelters that are concerned about stretching their resources, the time, the staff, money. And once they come to a presentation like this, or once they take a look at the safety startup manual, they're already partway there. They just need their questions answered. So those shelters, I find, come on board. It's the other shelters, and right now it's a majority of shelters, both in Canada and the US, that they're not even looking at this information because it just seems too much. Like, we just can't handle another thing. So this is where we really just need to keep educating and get out there and help them understand that they're not helping a majority of their population. And this can be a simple program. So to answer the question, it's yes and no. It just depends on who you're speaking with.
Great, thank you. Crystal and Laura, have you had any interactions locally that might give us some insight to this question?
I think locally there's a lot of support. In the research that our organizations did together in 2016, as well as the recent research, we see only a few professionals, I would say, who are raising potential challenges, but then they'd also they'd offer a solution. So they might say, well, what about allergies? But I think we could do this. So there's way more support than opposition. I think everyone is well aware that the maybe challenges or the inconvenience it's really nothing compared to how helpful this would be for survivors and animals. So I think it really is a lot of support. Sophia House, I think it's been going really well there. They are a second stage shelter where clients have their own apartment. So it works really well in terms of people being responsible for their own animals in their own separate space. But I think as more shelters become pet friendly, we're going to be hearing more examples. But I think we're ready for this in our province. And the other thing I would say too is that you can build your program up and see how it goes. You might get an influx of requests if you become pet friendly, but that also might not be the case. You might get one cat or two dogs, or it might start slowly and not every client is going to have a pet. Or you might be able to say, given the number of rooms we have and the space we have available, we can only have X number of families with pets at a time. So I think shelters can manage it in a way that works for them.
I feel too like it's important to note then that it's kind of the shelter will determine their capacity, right? So they will know best what they can accommodate and, you know, what works and what doesn't work, I guess, for their particular shelters. Would that be safe to say?
I think so, yes.
Great. A question about the community of practice. Question is the community of practice open to anyone, or do you have to be based in Saskatchewan?
I guess Crystal and I haven't discussed outside of Saskatchewan. Our kind of goal or our aim is folks that are actively working in shelters and their shelter staff, and with shelters that are either pet friendly or working to become pet friendly. So I would say shoot me an email and we can discuss. We can discuss for sure.
Yeah, because hopefully it would be of value to you. There's things that are different in different jurisdictions, different provincial legislation and all of that. But a lot of the things, like Laura said, that we're going to be talking about will be relevant no matter where you are. So if it's of value, join us. And we're going to be building this community of practice depending what the group needs as we go along.
Great. Again, we still have a little bit of time here for questions. So if you have any questions for Crystal, Laura, and Ali, please feel free to send them in. And Laura, just while we're on the topic of community of practice, do you mind just reminding us of when the first meeting is and how they can participate?
Yes. So the first meeting will be at 1 p.m. on February 15th, and it will be for about an hour to start with. And yeah, you can email me to sign up, or if you have any questions about it, either way, just send me an email. And yeah, I'm excited to get it started.
And your email address, Laura?
Oh, yes, my email is Laura at SaskSPCA.ca.
Great. We have another question rather, and Crystal, maybe we'll start with you, and then we can go to Ali again for a look outside Saskatchewan. But the question is, do you have any stats on the number of victims with pets who might need pet-friendly shelters each year?
Not exactly. We have to sort of guess and extrapolate based on what we know. Sometimes people will call shelters and say they're in need of a safe place to stay, and they may mention that they have pets. So shelters see those calls coming in and they're aware sometimes, but that's not necessarily being collected or tracked in a consistent way. And if people are aware that they probably can't take their pet, then they don't call. So that doesn't show up in stats that way. From the research that I conducted, but also that others in other parts of Canada and in the US have conducted, we know that in situations where intimate partner violence is happening, in about 80% of cases, abusers were harming or threatening or mistreating that animal in some way. But then the other piece is people share that even if their partner didn't hurt the animal, they're not going to leave without it because they love it. It's their companion. They're responsible for it, and they'd never leave the pet behind. So I think we have to sort of think about it and take our best educated guess thinking about that and what we know about the co-occurrence, and then also thinking about what Laura shared with us about how many how many Canadian families own a pet and how many incidents of intimate partner violence happen in Saskatchewan and in Canada every year, and sort of take a guess. So it could be a lot, and when it's safe to come forward, then we might start hearing from more people who could really use the support.
Ali, do you have access or information around statistics in the United States and maybe even here in Canada?
Yeah, that specific statistic is not being tracked right now. So I agree with Crystal. We just have to extrapolate from the numbers. Here in the US, we have about 10 million victims of interpersonal violence a year. 68% of Americans have a pet. If they just had one, that is 6.8 million pets that are in domestic violence situations that could need housing. That's a big extrapolation. And like me, I have 3 cats, one of whom is here. So that number could dramatically grow, but not everybody calls into a shelter for help. Not everybody is going to seek help in a shelter. So it's really hard to say, but I think a good rule of thumb is to realize that more than half your community could ask for help. And the research is all over the board, but the numbers are high. I mean, I've, like Crystal said, 80%. I've seen studies that 78% will not leave home without their pet, or they delay leaving home until they can find safe placement. So those numbers are high. So yeah, we don't have it specific for that question. I have been talking with some researchers about trying to get that specific number, but it's going to be a big study to do that.
Definitely a work in progress, I think it's safe to say. That would conclude all of the questions that we have at this point in time. I'm just wondering, Laura, Crystal, and Ali, if maybe you have any closing thoughts for our participants that are with us today.
Just please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And we have another webinar coming on February 9th. So we would encourage you to sign up for that one and come join us if you're able.
I echo all of that, and we're so glad that all of you could join us and be part of this today. And we're really encouraged by the number of professionals that are interested in having these conversations and thinking about this topic. And we're lucky here in Saskatchewan because we can learn from other provinces that already have pet-friendly shelters, and we can learn from Ali and all of the work she's done finding out what's happening in US shelters that are pet friendly. So we're in a really good position to take those innovations and learn from them. And we've got a really good start with our viability report that we hope is going to make this easy and stress-free for Saskatchewan shelters.
Crystal and Ali?
Keep spreading the word. If you are with a domestic violence shelter, talk to the staff about the importance of this. And if you're not with a domestic violence shelter, but you know of someone who is, or you want to reach out to your local shelter, I put in the chat the website to the safety program, and domestic violence shelters always receive free access to the Safety Startup Manual. And so just ask them to ask for it, and I will happily send it to them, and it will give them all of this information. They can literally sit at home with a cat in their lap and they can read about it and read how important it will be for their shelter, because the 300 some shelters that manual has helped, they've all said it benefited their shelter once they did it. They didn't realize how important it was until they did it. So it's just been life-saving across the board for all the shelters.
Fantastic information. And again, thank you to everybody that has joined us. Thank you, Laura, Crystal, and Ali, for making some time today to share this information with all of us.